She asked the servant for help, unaware he was the Alpha King examining her true heart. Nadia Osei did not plan for anything unusual to happen that morning. She never did. She simply arrived at work the way she always did, 10 minutes early, coffee in a paper cup, her bag slung over one shoulder, her mind already running through the list of things she needed to finish before noon. The Grenville estate was a large property, the kind that required dozens of hands to keep running, and Nadia had worked there for 3 years as a junior administrator under Director Pauline Marsh. She knew every corridor, every filing room, every shortcut between the east wing and the main hall. She knew the smell of the place in the morning, old wood, floor polish, and something faintly floral from the gardens that crept in through the windows when the groundskeepers opened the gates. What she did not expect, that particular Tuesday in late October, was a stranger at the gate. He was standing just inside the iron entrance when she arrived, a worn canvas bag at his feet, a form in his hand, squinting at the paper, as though the words had personally offended him. He was tall, taller than most men she saw at the estate, and broad across the shoulders, in the way of someone who worked with his hands rather than a gym. His clothes were plain, dark work trousers, a gray jacket that had seen better days, boots that were clean but clearly old. He did not look like someone who was lost. He looked like someone who had arrived exactly where he meant to be, but was not entirely certain what came next. Nadia slowed down. She had learned, working at the Grenville estate, that most people on the professional side of the building tended to walk past the workers at the gate as though they were part of the scenery. She had tried to unlearn that habit the moment she noticed it in herself, years ago. So she slowed down, and she looked at him, and she said, "Are you all right?" He looked up. His eyes were dark and steady, the kind of eyes that did not blink away from a question. "I think I am in the right place," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "I am starting work today. Groundskeeping." Nadia nodded. "Do you have your paperwork?" He held up the form. "I do. I am not sure who to give it to." She shifted her bag on her shoulder. She had her own work waiting. She had emails to answer, and a report that Director Marsh expected by 9:30. But she looked at the form in his hand, and then she looked at the main gate building, where the site manager, old Gerald, was supposed to be seated, but was, as usual, not at his post yet. "Come with me," she said. "I will take you to the right person." He followed her, without making a fuss about it. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply walked beside her through the ground floor corridor that connected the gate to the estate's service wing, and when she knocked on the facility's office door and handed him off to the supervisor inside, he thanked her quietly and without extra words. "What is your name?" she asked before she turned to leave. "Kofi," he said. "I am Nadia." She gave him a small nod. "Good luck on your first day." She thought nothing more of it as she walked away. She had her report to finish. She did not notice that he watched her go with an expression that was not quite as simple as gratitude. The Grenville estate had been in operation for over 60 years, originally built as a private residence for a wealthy industrialist before being converted into a regional administrative and conference facility. It sat on 11 acres of land in the foothills of the Aldermore Mountains, and it employed close to 90 people across its various departments. The indoor staff handled reception, administration, catering, and housekeeping. The outdoor staff managed the grounds, the vehicles, the maintenance of the older stone buildings, and the seasonal upkeep of the ornamental gardens that were, in the opinion of most visitors, the finest feature of the whole property. Nadia worked in the administration department. Her official title was junior administrator, though in practice she did considerably more than the title suggested. She scheduled meetings that Director Marsh forgot to schedule, proofed correspondence that the director's assistant failed to catch errors in, and served as the informal point of contact for any staff member who needed something navigated through the estate's labyrinthine internal systems. She did this without complaint, because she genuinely believed that if a job was worth doing, it was worth doing correctly, and she had never been able to bring herself to do anything halfway. Her colleagues were a mixed group. There were kind ones and difficult ones, and those who hovered in the comfortable middle ground of professional politeness without warmth. Her closest work friend was a woman named Diane, who managed the catering orders and had a talent for making any situation seem manageable through sheer cheerful stubbornness. There was also a man named Colin from the records department who was good for a laugh at lunch but tended to disappear when things got complicated. The rest of the staff Nadia knew, by face and by name, and she made it her business to know the names of the people that others did not bother to learn: the kitchen workers, the cleaners, the porters who shifted furniture for events, the gardeners who arrived before anyone else and left after everyone. She had started doing this in her first week, when she had overheard a senior manager refer to a young groundskeeper as the garden boy, despite the fact that the man was clearly in his 40s. Something about it had settled wrongly in her chest, and she had made a decision on the spot: she would learn the names. It was this habit that made her stop at the gate on Kofi's first morning. And it was this same habit that made the next 3 weeks proceed the way they did. She crossed paths with him several times in those early weeks. In the service corridor, near the garden entrance, once in the narrow hallway behind the main kitchen, where staff often cut through to save time. Each time, he nodded. Each time, she nodded back. He was quiet in the way of someone who had decided that silence was the appropriate setting for most situations, and only adjusted it when necessary. She noticed, without dwelling on it, that he was thorough in his work. The section of the east garden he had been assigned had already begun to look considerably tidier than it had in months. The rose beds along the old stone wall had been edged and cleared of the dead growth that had been left from the summer. The gravel paths had been raked and leveled. Gerald, the site manager, had mentioned in passing to the administration assistant that the new man was decent enough, which, coming from Gerald, was practically a glowing reference. On a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of Kofi's employment, Nadia arrived at the garden gate at her usual time and found him there, as he often was, clearing leaves from the path with a wide rake. She was carrying 2 coffees because she had bumped into Diane at the entrance, and they had planned to walk up together, only for Diane to be waylaid by a phone call from a supplier. Nadia was therefore holding a spare cup. She stopped. She looked at the coffee in her left hand. She looked at him. "Do you drink coffee?" she asked. He stopped raking. He looked at the cup, then at her. "Yes." "Then take this one. I cannot drink 2. He set the rake against the wall and accepted the cup with both hands, the way her grandmother had always taught her to receive something offered in kindness. She noticed that, though she did not say anything about it. "Thank you," he said. "It is nothing." She looked out at the garden, at the morning light coming in low and golden over the tops of the old yew hedges. "You have made a real difference to this section. It was getting overgrown. It just needed some attention," he said simply. She sipped her coffee. He sipped his. The morning was cold enough that both cups steamed lightly in the air. A thrush was singing somewhere deep in the yew hedge, the same 4-note phrase repeated with patient confidence. "How long have you done this kind of work?" she asked. She was not being nosy. She was genuinely curious in the way that she was curious about most things, carefully, without pressure. He was quiet for a moment before he answered. "A long time, on and off." She nodded, accepting the vagueness. "Do you like it?" "I like working outside," he said. "I like seeing results that are real, things you can point to and say, that is better than it was." She thought about that. "I think I understand that," she said. "I am mostly indoors, mostly moving papers around. Sometimes I wonder what the point of it is." "What keeps you going?" he asked. It was a direct question, asked without any attempt to soften it. She thought for a moment. "The people," she said honestly. "Not the work itself always, but the people the work eventually reaches. If I do my part well, things run better for everyone here. That matters." He looked at her steadily when she said that, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, in the way of someone who was genuinely listening, and not merely waiting for their turn to speak. "That is a good reason," he said. She finished her coffee, and told him she had to go. He thanked her again for the coffee. She waved it off and went inside. That evening, sitting at her small kitchen table in her flat 2 miles from the estate, Nadia thought briefly about the conversation, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she had enjoyed it, not in any complicated way. Simply in the way that a good, honest exchange between 2 people occasionally left a clean and quiet feeling behind it. She did not read anything into it. She was not the sort of person who built stories from small moments. She just noted it, the way she noted things that were true, and then she made herself dinner and read her book and went to sleep. What she could not have known, what no one at the Grenville estate knew, was that Kofi was not who he appeared to be. His canvas bag had been borrowed. His worn jacket had been chosen with care from a rack of ordinary clothes, assembled by a team of 3 people, who had spent 2 full days getting the details right. The form he had been holding at the gate on his first morning was real, submitted, and processed through the correct channels, indistinguishable from any other new hire's paperwork. His name was Kofi. That part was true. But the full name was Kofi Asante Brathwaite, and he was not a groundskeeper. He was the regional authority's alpha, a title that in their governance structure meant what a king might mean in a different era and context. The senior leader of a network of communities, territories, and institutions spread across 4 mountain districts. He was 34 years old. He had held the position for 6 years, and he was, in the private opinion of the 4 advisors who traveled everywhere with him, the most methodical man any of them had ever worked for. The reason he was at the Grenville estate under a false name and a borrowed jacket was not complicated, though it required some background to understand. 6 months earlier, his counsel had presented him with a matter of considerable importance. The estate had recently come under consideration as a formal partner facility for the regional authority's administrative program, a partnership that would involve significant shared resources, shared staffing, and shared governance decisions. Before any formal agreement could be signed, a thorough assessment was required. But the standard assessment processes, the official visits, the formal audits, the carefully arranged inspections, had a known flaw. They showed him what a place looked like when it knew it was being watched. Kofi had seen that problem before. He had signed agreements based on polished presentations and later discovered that the reality was nothing like the presentation. He had no interest in repeating that experience. So he had proposed something different. He would go himself, in person, without announcement, and spend time at the facility as an ordinary worker. He would see what the place actually was, how people actually treated each other, how the less powerful members of the staff were actually regarded, how the ethical temperature of the institution actually ran, when no one of importance appeared to be watching. His counsel had objected, for the obvious reasons. It was not safe. It was not dignified. It was not the kind of thing a man in his position did. He had listened to all of their objections, and then he had done it anyway. He had been at the estate for 3 weeks, when Nadia stopped to help him at the gate on his first morning. He had been watching the estate's patterns for exactly 22 days, when she offered him her spare coffee, and he had been asking himself quiet, careful questions about the character of the people around him, when she stood by the garden wall in the cold October light, and told him, without any performance, that she kept going for the sake of the people the work eventually reached. He was a man who had heard a great many things said by a great many people in his years in leadership. He had learned, through hard experience, to listen for the difference between what people said and what they meant. He had learned that most people, when they spoke about their values, were describing an ideal version of themselves, rather than an accurate one. He had learned to be patient with that, because it was human, and to keep listening for the rare moments when a person said something that was simply, plainly, unreservedly true. She had sounded true. He had not made any decisions on the basis of that. He was too careful for that. But he had noted it, the way he noted things that mattered, and he had continued to watch and to listen. The question he was asking himself, the question that had brought him to this place in a borrowed jacket with a rented canvas bag, was not only about the estate's institutional integrity. It was also a more personal question, one that his counsel did not know about, one that he had not shared with anyone. For the past 2 years, the people closest to him had been quietly, persistently raising the subject of his future. His position required, eventually, a partner beside him, someone who would stand in a public role, who would share the weight of it, who could be trusted completely. He had resisted the conversation, not because he disagreed with the logic, but because he had seen what happened when that kind of choice was made, on the basis of politics or appearances or convenience, rather than genuine knowledge of a person's character. He was not going to make that mistake. He had come to the Grenville estate for institutional reasons, but he had stayed alert for a different kind of reason, one he had not fully admitted to himself yet, in those first weeks, but that was beginning to take shape in the back of his mind, with the slow, patient certainty of something that had already decided what it was. He finished raking the path after Nadia went inside. The thrush had stopped singing. The morning light had shifted from gold to a flatter, cooler white. He set the rake against the wall, picked up his canvas bag from beside the gatepost, and walked back toward the gardener's shed to begin the rest of his day. He thought about what she had said. Things you can point to and say, that is better than it was. He turned that over in his mind as he walked. He thought about what it said about a person, that this was what satisfied them. Not credit, not recognition, not the appearance of having done something well, but the simple, quiet reality of it. The actuality of improvement, the thing itself, not the performance of the thing. He thought, that is rarer than it sounds. And then he picked up his tools and went back to work, and said nothing to anyone, and kept watching, and kept listening, and waited to see what the next thing would be. Nadia, 2 buildings away, was already deep in her inbox, already thinking about the report, already moving through her morning, with the steady, purposeful momentum that she brought to everything. She was not thinking about the conversation by the gate. She was not thinking about Kofi at all. She was just doing her job. And that, in its own quiet way, was exactly the point. Director Pauline Marsh was a woman who believed that efficiency was the highest form of respect. Respect for time, for resources, and for the intelligence of the people you worked with. She ran her department with a calendar, a shared task list, and a system of color-coded folders that she had refined over 15 years, and would defend to the last. She was not unkind, she was simply precise. She expected the same precision from her team, and she expressed disappointment through a very particular variety of silence. A silence that contained, somehow, the full weight of every unmet expectation she had ever accumulated. Nadia had learned to read that silence in her first month, and had spent the following 3 years doing her best to never cause it. Which was why, on the Friday morning of the 4th week of Kofi's employment at the estate, when Nadia realized that a critical package of documents had gone missing, her first response was not panic. It was the controlled, focused alertness of someone who understood exactly how serious the situation was and refused to let the seriousness become paralysis. The package was a set of signed contracts and supplementary agreements between the Grenville estate and a partner organization based in the Southern District. Director Marsh had signed them the previous afternoon. Nadia had been responsible for ensuring they were sent to the records room for secure storage before the end of the working day. She had handed them to the administration assistant, a young man named Oliver, at 4:10. Oliver had confirmed he would take them immediately. Nadia had come in the next morning to find that the records room had no entry for them. The log showed no delivery. Oliver, when she found him at his desk, looked at her with the expression of someone who had just remembered something they should not have forgotten. "I left them on my desk," he said. "I was going to take them after I finished a call, and then I got a second call, and then it was 5 and I went home." Nadia closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "Where is the package now?" she asked. He stood up and went to his desk. He opened a drawer. He looked in a second drawer. He checked the shelf above his monitor. Then he turned back to her, with the expression that she had known was coming from the moment he said he had left them on his desk. "I do not know," he said. The documents had to be in the system before 9 o'clock that morning, when Director Marsh was scheduled to begin a review meeting with 3 regional partners, who had traveled in specifically to confirm the signed copies were in order. If the documents were not there, the meeting would have to be postponed. If the meeting was postponed, the partner organization would be inconvenienced and potentially irritated. If they were irritated, the director would be informed of why, and then she would be silent, and that silence would settle over the department like weather. Nadia did not waste time on Oliver. She turned on her heel and began retracing the route the documents should have taken. From Oliver's desk, down the main administration corridor, through the internal mail hub, and into the records room. She checked Oliver's desk drawers herself. She checked the outgoing tray. She went to the internal mail hub and spoke to the woman who staffed it, a calm, unhurried woman named Pat, who had handled the estate's internal mail for 11 years and knew every route and exception by memory. Pat checked her log. She checked the returned items shelf. She checked the overflow cart. Nothing. "Could they have been misrouted?" Nadia asked. Pat thought about it. There was a bit of a backlog yesterday afternoon. If they came in without a clear destination label, someone might have put them with the general delivery pile. Where does the general delivery pile go? Storage annex usually, or the East Wing mailroom if someone grabbed the wrong cart. Nadia glanced at her phone. It was 20 minutes past 7. The meeting was at 9. The East Wing mailroom was on the other side of the building, through the service corridors. She set off at a fast walk. The East Wing service corridor was quieter than the main building at this hour. Most of the indoor staff arrived between 8 and 8:30. The corridor was lit but dim, smelling of the floor cleaner that the overnight team used, cool and slightly echoey underfoot. Nadia moved quickly, her footsteps steady, her mind running through contingency plans in parallel. What she would say to the director if the documents were not found, how quickly she could get Oliver to draft a letter of explanation, whether there was any way to delay the partner's arrival without triggering a chain of phone calls that would inevitably reach Marsh before the morning was out. She was so focused on the problem that she nearly walked into the person coming in the other direction. She pulled up short. So did he. It was Kofi. He was carrying a box of gardening supplies. She could see trowels and a pair of heavy gloves and a coiled length of wire, and he looked entirely untroubled by the fact that they had very nearly collided in a corridor at 7 in the morning. "Sorry," she said immediately. "I was not looking." "Neither was I," he said, which was generous of him, because she suspected she had been the one moving faster. He shifted the box under one arm. "You look like someone who has lost something important." She laughed, a short, dry sound. "I have, actually." She did not normally share work problems with people outside her department, but there was something about his directness that made deflection feel like unnecessary effort. "A set of documents. They need to be in the records room by 9, and I cannot find them." He tilted his head slightly. "Where have you already looked?" She listed the places quickly. He listened without interrupting. "Has anyone checked the East Wing mailroom?" he said when she finished. "That is where I am going now." "Do you know where it is?" She hesitated. She knew it was in the East Wing. She had never actually been there herself. She had a general sense of the direction. He seemed to understand the hesitation without her having to explain it. "I will take you," he said. She started to object. She did not want to take up his morning. He had his own work. But he had already turned and was walking, and she either had to follow him or stand in the corridor watching him go, and she did not have time for either indecision or pride. She followed. He moved through the service corridor with the ease of someone who had already mapped the building in his mind, which he had, systematically and deliberately, in his first week, though she did not know that. He took a left, then a right, then down a short flight of stairs to a lower corridor that Nadia had never used, lit by narrow windows set high in the stone wall, the kind of part of the building that had been built before aesthetics were considered. The East Wing mailroom was a small, cluttered space at the end of the lower corridor, staffed in the mornings by a young man named Pete, who was responsible for sorting anything that came in from the main hub overnight. Pete looked up when they arrived, mildly startled to see two people he did not expect. Kofi set his box down outside the door. He looked at Pete. "Did you receive anything yesterday afternoon that was not clearly labeled? Documents? Maybe in a brown envelope?" Pete thought about it. There was a big brown envelope that came down with the late cart. No destination marked. "I put it in the holding tray." Nadia moved past him into the room before he had finished speaking. The holding tray was on a shelf to the left of the door, stacked with various pieces of misdirected correspondence. She went through it, carefully but quickly, and at the bottom of the pile, she found them. A large brown envelope, slightly bent at one corner, with Director Marsh's seal on the front flap, and Nadia's own handwriting on the label that she had attached. The label that should have told Oliver exactly where to send it, and that had, evidently, not been enough. She exhaled. It was a quiet, controlled exhale, but her hands were slightly less steady when she held the envelope than they had been a moment before. She had not let herself feel the full weight of the anxiety until this second, because she had not been able to afford to. She looked up. Kofi was leaning against the doorframe, watching her. "Found," she said. "Good." He said it simply, without drama, without any of the slight smugness that people sometimes could not resist when they had been useful. She pressed the envelope to her chest for a moment, just a moment, and then she straightened. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it in the specific, serious way that she only used when gratitude was not a social nicety, but an actual acknowledgement of something that had mattered. "You did not have to do that." "No," he agreed, "but it took 3 minutes, and you needed it, so." She looked at him for a moment. He met her eyes without any particular expression on his face, just the same steady attention she had noticed before, the kind that did not ask anything back from you, which made it easier, somehow, to receive. "I owe you a coffee," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, something quieter and more considered than a smile. "I still have the one from last week," he said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of her, and it felt better than the controlled exhale had. She thanked Pete, tucked the envelope under her arm, and walked back through the lower corridor, with a pace that was brisk but no longer driven by dread. She had 50 minutes to get the documents to the records room, verify the log entry, and brief the director before the meeting began. It was tight, but it was manageable. She was halfway back to the main building before she realized she had walked away without saying goodbye to Kofi. She stopped, turned around. But the corridor behind her was empty. He had already gone back to retrieve his box of supplies and go about his own morning. He had not waited for her to say anything more. He had simply been helpful, and then he had stepped back out of the way, and now the corridor was just a corridor again, cool and quiet and smelling of floor polish. She stood there for a second, slightly uncertain of the feeling in her chest, something like the feeling of noticing that someone had been kind, in a way that cost them something, even if only time, and had not made a production of the cost. Then she turned around again and walked to the records room, and the documents were logged in at 7:58, and Director Marsh began her meeting at 9, and the partners confirmed the signed copies and expressed their satisfaction, and the day continued without incident. That evening, Nadia told Diane about it over lunch, without embellishment, just the facts. Diane said, "Your groundskeeper sounds like a good person." Nadia said, "He is not my groundskeeper." Diane smiled in the way that she had, the one that knew better than to argue, and changed the subject. Kofi spent the afternoon pruning the long hedgerow along the south boundary of the estate. It was slow, painstaking work that required patience and a careful eye for the shape of the thing underneath the overgrowth, the form that was already there, waiting to be made visible. He liked this kind of work. It required you to look properly before you cut. He thought about the look on Nadia's face when she had found the envelope. Not relief, or not only relief. The controlled release of someone who had held herself together through genuine uncertainty and refused to come apart at any point along the way. He had watched her move through a problem, quickly, logically, without blaming the young man who had made the error, without wasting energy on panic, and he had taken note of what he saw. He had also taken note of the way she thanked people. She had thanked Pete, the mailroom worker, as though his role in the recovery was equally significant, which technically it was, since he had been the one who held onto the envelope rather than discarding it. Most people would have thanked him as an afterthought, if at all. She had looked at him directly and said his name. Small things. He knew better than to build too much on small things, but small things were what character was made of, in his experience. The large moments, the obvious tests, the public pressures, those showed how people performed. The small moments showed who they actually were. He was not forming conclusions, he was still gathering information. But the shape of what he was gathering was becoming something, slowly, the way the shape of the hedgerow was becoming visible under the work of his shears. Not yet finished, not yet certain, but beginning to be recognizable as something that had been there all along. He finished the hedgerow section at 5:15, cleaned his tools, and stored them in the shed. He walked to the gate, nodded to Gerald, and went to his accommodation. He had a phone call that evening with one of his advisors, a man named Leon, who asked for his preliminary impressions of the estate. He gave them, carefully and in general terms. He did not mention Nadia. He was not ready to mention Nadia, because he was not yet sure what there was to say about her that was not simply, honestly, that she had surprised him, and he was not in the habit of being surprised, and the surprise itself was something he wanted to sit with for a while before he said it out loud. Leon asked when he expected to have a full assessment ready. Kofi said he needed a few more weeks. Leon said all right, and moved on to other business, and Kofi sat at the small table in his rented room, and looked out the window at the dark, and thought about hedgerows, and envelopes, and the particular quality of a person's face when they find what they had nearly lost. The mornings came and went, and something settled between them. Not an arrangement, not a plan, but a pattern. The kind that forms without anyone choosing it, the way water finds its level without being told. It started with the coffee. After the morning of the misrouted envelope, Nadia had made good on her offhand remark about owing him one, and she had brought 2 cups to the garden gate on the following Wednesday. He had been there, as he usually was at that hour, and he had taken the cup without making anything of it, and they had stood at the gate for 10 minutes, talking about nothing in particular, before she went inside. The next Wednesday she brought 2 cups again, and the one after that, By the fourth Wednesday, it had become a thing, not by agreement, not by any conscious decision on either side, but simply because neither of them had given any indication of wanting it to stop. Diane had noticed, of course. Diane noticed everything. She mentioned it once, lightly, during a lunch break, and Nadia said there was nothing to mention, and Diane said, "Of course," in a tone that meant the exact opposite, and they moved on. The conversations at the gate were not long, 7 minutes some mornings, 12 or 15 on others, depending on how early they both arrived and how complicated the day ahead looked. But within those minutes, a real quality of exchange had developed, the kind that had nothing to do with the circumstances that had brought them together, and everything to do with the fact that they were, as it turned out, two people who were interested in the same general territory, the question of how to do things well and why it mattered. He asked good questions, not personal questions, not prying ones, questions about ideas, about what she thought, about how things worked. He asked about the estate and what she thought its real function was. He asked about her background, not in the way of wanting biographical details, but in the way of wanting to understand how someone arrives at the person they are. She asked him things in return, more carefully, sensing that he was a private person, and that there were regions of his life that he did not throw open readily. He told her some things. He told her he had grown up in a large family with limited resources, which had taught him early that the ability to solve problems yourself was worth more than almost any other skill. He told her he had done a lot of different kinds of work before settling into this one, which she took at face value, and which was, in one sense, entirely true. He told her that he valued reliability over almost any other quality in the people around him, and that he had arrived at this conclusion not from theory, but from the experience of having been let down at important moments by people he had trusted too quickly. He said this without bitterness, in the tone of someone who had processed a lesson and moved past the pain of it, keeping only what was useful. She told him things in return. She told him about her mother, who had raised 3 children alone after her father left when Nadia was 6, and who had done it with a kind of calm determination that Nadia had spent her whole life trying to understand well enough to replicate. She told him that she had almost left the Grenville estate twice, once after a particularly difficult review period in her second year, and once after a conflict with a senior colleague that had made her feel entirely without ground. She had stayed both times, she said, because running away from difficulty was not something she had ever been able to respect in herself. She had stayed and worked through it, and each time the ground had come back, and she had been glad she had not left. He listened to all of this with the same quality of attention she had noticed from the first, full, unhurried, asking follow-up questions that showed he had actually heard the previous thing she said, rather than simply waiting for it to finish. She found herself thinking about it sometimes during the day, not about him specifically, but about the quality of being properly listened to. It was rarer than it should be. Most conversations involved 2 people waiting to talk, or one person performing interest while internally cataloging their response. The conversations at the garden gate did not feel like that. They felt clean, useful in the way that a good meal was useful. Nothing left over, nothing wasted, and a different kind of energy available afterward. She did not examine this too closely. She was not someone who pulled at threads that were better left in place. On a Thursday morning in late November, she arrived at the gate earlier than usual. There had been a frost overnight, and the garden had the particular sharpness of very cold air and white ground. Every surface outlined more clearly than usual. Every branch and stone and edge brought into high relief by the fine coating of ice. Kofi was already there, but he was not working. He was standing at the far end of the path, looking at something in the bed of roses along the old wall, his breath making small visible clouds in the cold air. She came to stand beside him. "What are you looking at?" He pointed. In among the rose canes, 2 small birds were perched very close together on a low branch. Sparrows, or something like sparrows. Their feathers puffed against the cold, their eyes bright and alert. "They come here every morning," he said. "Same branch." Nadia watched them for a moment. "Do you notice things like that everywhere you go?" "I try to," he said. "You miss a lot if you do not look." She thought about that. "What else have you noticed about this place?" she said. It was an open question, asked without any specific expectation. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him considering how much to say, deciding where the edge was between honest and more than was right for a morning conversation at a garden gate. That the people who work outside are treated differently from the people who work inside, he said finally. That there are names most of the senior staff do not know. That some things here are very well maintained, and others have been quietly let go, because the cost of maintaining them would require a conversation that someone is avoiding. She looked at him. That is very accurate. I have been watching, he said. What do you think of it? She asked. I think it is a common problem, he said, but common does not mean it is not worth addressing. She looked back at the birds. They had not moved. I have tried to push back on some of it, she said, quietly. It does not always land. Most right things take more than one attempt, he said. She smiled at that. Not a polite smile, a real one, the kind that reached somewhere behind her eyes. That is almost exactly what my mother used to say. She sounds like someone worth listening to. She was. There was a pause. He turned his head slightly to look at her. Not intrusively, just noting the past tense. She was looking at the birds. The cold air was still around them both. She passed 4 years ago, Nadia said, without being asked. She said it without grief in her voice, or not the raw kind, the settled kind, the kind that has been lived with long enough to be carried without it overtaking you. She was very strong for a very long time, and then she was not, and then she was gone. It happened fast at the end. I am sorry, he said. She nodded. She would have found the birds funny, she said. She had a theory that the cold made everything honest, that it was too uncomfortable to pretend in the cold. You either were a thing, or you were not. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think I would have agreed with her. Nadia looked at him. Something about the way he said it, not in the way of easy agreement, but in the way of someone who has tested the theory themselves and found it holds, made her believe him. She thought, you are not the kind of person who says things he does not mean. She did not say that aloud. She went back to looking at the birds, and he went back to his work, and she went back inside when the time came, and the morning continued. What happened after that morning was gradual but unmistakable. The conversations grew a little longer. The questions went a little deeper. They began to establish small details of each other's preferences and dispositions. She learned that he drank his coffee without sugar, that he was at his most alert in the early morning, and at his slowest in the middle of the afternoon, that he had strong opinions about planning that he expressed mildly, and without insistence, but did not back away from if challenged. He learned that she was more emotional than she appeared, that she processed things privately and thoroughly before she said them, that she was quick with other people's pain and slow with her own. None of this was spoken about directly. It accumulated the way knowledge of a person accumulates, through 100 small confirmations, 100 tiny windows through which the actual person is briefly visible, before the ordinary business of the day pulls the curtain back. Kofi, in those weeks, was doing 2 things simultaneously. He was being present in the conversations, genuinely, not as an observer, but as someone who was actually there, and he was watching, with the careful, unhurried attention that was native to him, for the things that a person could not easily perform over time. Not the best version of Nadia, the real one, the one that came through in the moments between the sentences. He noticed that she apologized too readily for small things that were not her fault, and not at all for things that needed real attention. He noticed that she picked up litter from the garden path without making anything of it, the way people did things they had done so long that they no longer noticed themselves doing them. He noticed that when she was worried about something, she did not show it in her face but in the pace of her walking, faster, sharper, with more purpose than the errand required. He noticed the way she spoke about her mother, not with sentimentality, but with precision, the way you spoke about someone whose impact on you was so foundational that there was no point trying to dress it up. He noticed that she made eye contact when she thanked people, even the quick ordinary thank yous, the ones that most people threw out as social reflex. She looked at the person. She said the name. She made it mean something, every time. He was not forming romantic impressions. He was forming an assessment, or so he told himself, in the part of his mind that was still functioning as the careful, methodical authority figure who had come here for institutional and personal reasons that were separate and distinct. The part of him that was simply a man, standing in a cold garden, talking to someone who made the morning seem considerably more worth being in. That part was less interested in the distinction. But he did not act on it. He was not someone who acted before he was certain, and he was not yet certain. He was close to certain. He was closer than he had been at any point in a long time. But close was not there yet, and there mattered. He kept watching. He kept listening. The birds came back to their branch each morning, and the frost came and went, and the mornings kept delivering something that felt, quietly, stubbornly, undeniably, like the beginning of something real. He thought about the question that had originally brought him to this place, the personal one that existed alongside the institutional one. He thought about it with new weight now. He had come looking for proof of character in the people around him, so that he might, at some point, know who was worth knowing. He had not expected to find his answer this quickly, or in this form. He had not expected that the answer would walk up to a stranger at a gate and offer to help, simply because that was who she was. Nadia, walking in one Thursday morning with 2 cups of coffee, thought that she had made a friend, an unusual one, a quiet one she knew less about than she might have liked, but a real one, and real things were worth protecting. She had no idea what she did not know, and for now, that was all right. For now, the birds were there, and the coffee was warm, and the morning was cold and honest, and 2 people stood at a gate and talked, and it was enough to be simply what it was. The envelope of corruption was opened quietly, the way most corruption is, not with a dramatic event or a public accusation, but with one small request that assumed the answer would be yes. It came on a Monday morning, 3 days into December, when the cold had settled into the stone of the building, and the heating in the East Wing had been reported as inconsistent for the 2nd week running. The estate was in the final preparation period for its annual partner review, a 2-day event in which various organizations affiliated with the Grenville property came to assess the year's operations, sign off on renewals, and identify any concerns. It was the busiest and most politically delicate period in the estate's calendar, and everyone felt the pressure of it, from Director Marsh downward. Nadia felt it particularly, because Director Marsh's anxiety expressed itself in an increased volume of tasks with tightened deadlines, and Nadia was the person those tasks most often landed on. On this Monday morning, a man named Adrian Cleave came to her desk. Adrian Cleave was a senior operations manager, one of the 3 who reported directly to the estate's executive committee. He was in his late 40s, well-dressed in the careful, considered way of someone who had decided that appearance was an argument for authority. He had salt and pepper hair, and the slightly polished manner of a person who had navigated institutional politics for long enough that it had become the primary way he moved through any room. He sat down across from Nadia's desk, without being invited, and placed a folder on the surface between them. "Nadia," he said, "I need your signature on something." She looked at the folder. "What is it?" "An inventory reconciliation," he said. "Year-end. We are tying up the supply accounts before the partner review, and I just need an authorized administrator to confirm the figures." She reached for the folder. She opened it. She began to read. Adrian Cleave leaned back slightly in his chair and waited with the relaxed confidence of someone who fully expected this to take 30 seconds. It took longer than 30 seconds. Nadia read the document with the same methodical attention she brought to everything. She read the supply figures. She read the reconciled totals, and then she turned to the supporting annex and read that too, and when she had finished reading, she placed the document flat on the desk and looked at it for a moment. The numbers were wrong. Not subtly wrong, not the kind of error that crept in through miscalculation or data entry fatigue. The kind of wrong that had direction to it. 3 supply categories: groundskeeping materials, catering stock, and general maintenance consumables, showed orders that were between 15 and 22% higher than the estate's actual usage records for the same period. The reconciled total absorbed those discrepancies by adjusting the base figures in a way that looked, on a quick read, like a reasonable accounting maneuver, but was, on a careful read, simply not true. Someone had inflated the supply orders. The difference between what was ordered and what was actually used had, in effect, vanished, and the document she was being asked to sign would officially confirm that the figures were accurate. She looked up at Adrian Cleave. "The supply figures in the groundskeeping category," she said. "They do not match the usage records." His expression did not change. "There is always some variance at year-end." "This is not variance," she said. "This is a consistent overstatement across 3 categories." "Nadia," he said, her name in the tone of a patient teacher addressing someone who had misunderstood a simple concept. "This is a reconciliation document. Reconciliation means we bring the figures into alignment. That is the process. Alignment with what? She said. If the usage records say we consumed a certain amount of material, and the orders show we received considerably more, signing this document says both are true. They cannot both be true. Then he uncrossed his legs and leaned forward slightly, and the expression on his face changed. Not dramatically, not in the manner of a villain making a declaration, but in the subtle way of someone removing a social performance that was no longer useful. This document goes in front of the committee on Thursday, he said. The partner review starts Friday. The figures need to be clean for the review, and the person who makes the figures clean is the person whose name is on the reconciliation. He let that sit for a moment. I am offering you the opportunity to have your name on that document. Nadia looked at the document. She looked at him. And what does the person whose name is on that document get? The confidence of the operations management team going into the review, he said. And the visibility that comes with being someone those of us at the senior level feel we can rely on. She understood very clearly what was being offered and what was being implied. She also understood, with the same clarity, that she was being tested by circumstances that had nothing to do with her character, and everything to do with what someone else assumed about it. She closed the folder. She placed her hand flat on the cover. I will not sign this, she said. Adrian Cleve was quiet. He looked at her hand on the folder. Nadia, he said again, and this time the tone had the quality of a warning, dressed as a reminder. These figures are not accurate, she said. I do not know why they are not accurate, but I am not able to confirm something I know to be false. If you believe the figures are correct, I can walk you through the specific discrepancies I have identified, and you can show me what I have misunderstood. He did not take her up on that offer. The fact that he did not was itself an answer. He picked up the folder from her desk. He stood up. He said, in a voice that was perfectly pleasant and entirely without warmth, I hope you have thought carefully about your position here, Nadia. She looked at him. I think about my position here every day, she said. That is why I will not sign it. He left. She sat very still for a moment, after the door closed. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. But there was something beneath the steadiness, not fear exactly, but the particular awareness of having done something that could not be undone, and of not being sorry about it, and of knowing that not being sorry did not mean there would be no consequences. She thought about her mother. She thought about the words her mother had used, on a particular afternoon when Nadia was 17, and had been asked to cover up a classmate's dishonesty, and had refused, and had been made briefly miserable for it by the people around her. Her mother had said, "The right thing is rarely comfortable, and almost always worth it. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." She took a breath. She picked up her pen and went back to her own work. She did not know that she was being watched. She had not seen Kofi when Adrian Cleve arrived, because he was not visible. He was in the service corridor adjacent to the administration office, passing through on his way from the facilities shed to the south garden. The administration office had a window that looked out onto the corridor, and Kofi had glanced in, as he sometimes did, a habit, not a calculation, and had seen the scene unfolding inside. He had stopped. He could not hear the words through the glass. He could not hear what Nadia said, or what Cleve said, but he had spent enough of his life reading rooms to understand what he was looking at. He had seen the document on the desk. He had seen Cleve's body language, the lean, the pause, the changed expression. He had seen Nadia's face, which was composed and very still, in the way a person's face was composed and still, when they had made a decision that cost something, and were not backing down from it. He had seen Cleve pick up the folder and leave. He had stood in the corridor for a long moment, not moving. Then he had done something that was not within his stated role, but was within his actual one. He had gone, quietly, to the estate's records room, and spoken to Pat, who handled the internal mail and had access to the delivery logs. He had explained, in general terms, that there was a discrepancy in some year-end supply records that he thought might be worth documenting before the partner review, and that if there were any copies of the original delivery receipts for the groundskeeping supply orders for the past 8 months, it would be useful to have them flagged and retained in a way that they could not be mislaid. Pat had looked at him for a moment, with the expression of someone who was more alert to institutional politics than her quiet manner suggested. "I will make sure they are properly logged," she said. "Thank you," he said. He had not told Pat who he was. He did not need to. He had made the request with enough authority in his voice that it did not require a title behind it, and Pat, who had worked at the estate for 11 years and understood exactly which conversations mattered, did exactly what he asked, without requiring an explanation. He went back to his work in the south garden. He spent the afternoon clipping the edges of the main lawn with a level of attention that the lawn had probably not received in some time. His hands were busy, his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the look on Nadia's face in that window, not the controlled composure. Anyone could produce that under enough pressure. He was thinking about the moment just before it, the moment when he could see, even through glass, even from a distance, the exact instant when she had read the document carefully enough to understand what it was, and had understood, and had made her decision. It had not taken long. It was not agonizing. She had read, and understood, and decided, and that had been the end of it. He thought about what that said. Not about courage. Courage was too large a word for something that small. He thought about what it said about habit. About the automatic nature of it. About the fact that for some people, honesty was a daily performance. A difficult choice renewed under pressure. And for others, it was simply what they did. The same way they breathed or walked. The default from which deviation would require effort. She was, he thought, the second kind. He had met very few of those in his years of leadership. He had met many people who were honest when honesty was safe or convenient. He had met far fewer who were honest when it cost something. He finished the lawn edging at 4:45. He put the tools away. He walked to the gate, nodded to Gerald, and went home. He called Leon that evening. Leon answered on the second ring, as he always did. "I have something I need you to check," Kofi said, without preamble. Supply chain records for the Grenville estate, specifically, the groundskeeping, catering, and maintenance categories over the past year. Cross-reference against the delivery receipts that are on file, and tell me where the discrepancies are. Leon was quiet for a moment. "How did you come across this?" "I was paying attention," Kofi said. "How quickly can you have it?" 48 hours. "Good." He paused. "Also, there is a woman in the administration department, junior administrator. I need you to make sure that if any adverse employment action is taken against her in the next 2 weeks, I know about it before it goes through." There was a longer silence this time. Leon knew better than to ask the question that the silence implied. "All right," he said. Kofi thanked him and ended the call. He sat at the table in the rented room and looked out at the dark for a while, the way he often did in the evenings when there were things that needed to settle. He thought about what the next few weeks might bring. He thought about the document Cleve had tried to get signed and the implications of it if it had been signed. He thought about Pat quietly preserving the original delivery receipts, and about the 48 hours in which Leon would find the shape of whatever had been happening in those supply accounts. And he thought about Nadia, sitting at her desk after Cleve left, picking up her pen, and going back to her work. He had a great many things to think about. He thought about all of them, carefully, for a long time. Then he went to sleep, because tomorrow would require him to be useful, and you could not be useful when you were tired. In the morning, 2 things happened. The first was that a senior colleague sent an email to Director Marsh, suggesting, in careful language, that Nadia's attitude toward cooperative processes had been less than supportive of late. The second was that Nadia arrived at work, collected 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen, and walked out to the garden gate, where Kofi was already there, as always, and handed him his cup, without any indication on her face that the previous day had been anything other than ordinary. He took the cup. He looked at her. "How are you?" he asked. "Fine," she said. And then she paused, and he saw the pause, and she said, "Actually, I had a difficult day yesterday." "I know," he said, and immediately adjusted. "I mean, you seem like you may have." She looked at him. Something crossed her face, not suspicion, just attention, but she let it pass. "I was asked to sign something I should not have signed," she said. "I did not sign it." "Good," he said quietly. She looked at the garden, at the frost on the lawn. "There may be fallout," she said. "Probably," he agreed. "I am not worried about it," she said, and it was said in the tone of someone who was, a little, but who had decided not to let that be the governing fact. He looked at her profile against the cold morning air, and he thought, "I am going to have to tell you who I am, and I do not yet know how to do that without changing everything. But that was a later problem. Today she was here, and the coffee was warm, and she had not signed the document, and that was what mattered right now. "The sparrows are back," he said, nodding toward the rose bed. She turned, and she saw them, and she smiled. That mattered too. The rumor arrived the way most rumors did, without a specific origin, without a named source, spreading through the communal language of suggestion and implication, until it occupied the air of every room it entered. Nadia first heard it on a Tuesday, from a woman named Sandra who worked in the catering department, and who was not malicious in the way of someone who enjoyed cruelty, but was malicious in the way of someone who confused the sharing of information with the performing of importance. Sandra mentioned it while passing Nadia in the corridor on the way to the kitchen, framed as concern, which was the traditional frame for gossip that its carrier did not want to own. "I am only telling you because I think you should know what people are saying," Sandra said, which was the single least convincing preamble in the history of human communication. What people were saying, apparently, was that Nadia had been spending a great deal of time with the new groundskeeper. What people were implying, in the particular way of people who could see the shape of an implication without being willing to state it plainly, was that she had reasons for this that were not simply friendship. Specifically, and here Sandra lowered her voice to the pitch of someone imparting confidential information, there was a suggestion that Kofi had connections, that he was not simply what he appeared to be, that someone who was seen having coffee with him every week might have reasons beyond the social. Nadia listened to this without expression. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and walked away. She went into the bathroom at the end of the east corridor, which was the only private space in the building that did not require a key, and she stood at the sink and looked at her face in the mirror for about 20 seconds. She had two distinct feelings, and she identified them both clearly, because she had always found it more productive to name things than to let them swim. The first was anger. Clean, cold, specific anger at the particular quality of the implication, that a friendship between a woman and a man could not exist without ulterior motive, and that if there was a motive, it would be assumed to be hers, and it would be assumed to be calculating. The implication sat somewhere between an insult to her integrity and an insult to the straightforwardness of a friendship she had come to genuinely value. The second was something more complicated. The detail that Kofi had connections, that he was not simply what he appeared to be. She had dismissed this, in the first second, as the kind of elaboration that people added to rumors to make them feel more significant, but she could not entirely dismiss it. She held it up and looked at it in the privacy of her own mind. She thought about the quality of his attention, the precision of his questions, the way he had navigated the East Wing corridors on her behalf, without hesitation on that morning weeks ago, as though he had already walked every route. She thought about the way he had spoken about institutional problems, not with the frustration of someone experiencing them, but with the analyzing detachment of someone who had been in a position to observe them from above. She had a feeling that she did not like, the feeling of something she had not been told. She could not name what it was, she could not locate it specifically, but it was there, and she was not the sort of person who ignored things that were there. She turned the tap on, rinsed her hands for no reason other than to have something to do with them, dried them on the paper towel, and went back to work. She was not going to let the rumor sit. That was not who she was. She had found, over the years, that unaddressed things grew, and that the longer you let something sit in the air, unspoken between you and another person, the more weight it acquired, until it was no longer about the original thing at all. She had seen friendships and working relationships quietly collapse under the weight of things that could have been resolved with a 10-minute direct conversation. She waited until the next morning, when the circumstances were right. He was at the gate. The morning was dry but overcast, the sky the flat, pale gray of midwinter, the garden quiet, except for the sound of a wood pigeon somewhere in the yew hedge. She came to the gate with 2 cups, as she always did. She handed him his. She took a sip of hers. "There is something I want to say to you," she said. He looked at her. He waited. "There is a rumor going around that I spend time with you, because you have some kind of connection, or influence, that I am trying to benefit from," she said. She said it plainly, without softening or dressing it up, because she had found that the only way to say a difficult thing cleanly was to say it directly. "I want you to know that I am aware of it, and that it is not true, and that I am not going to pretend it does not exist by saying nothing." He was very still for a moment. His expression did not give her a great deal to read, which was familiar by now. But beneath the stillness, she sensed something that was not quite comfort and not quite discomfort, something more like alertness. "I heard something about it," he said. "Then you know what I am referring to." She looked at him steadily. "I value this. The mornings, the conversations. I value them for what they are, and I would not want them to be reduced to something they are not." She paused. "And I also want to say, if there is something about your situation here that I do not know, and that is relevant to our friendship, I would rather you told me than have me find out through someone else's version of it." There it was. She had said both things. She waited. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the garden. The wood pigeon had gone quiet. The overcast sky sat flat and even above the yew hedges. When he spoke, his voice was the same as it always was. Low, unhurried, considered. "You are right to say it," he said. "And the friendship is real. That is not complicated or qualified. It is simply real." She nodded. "Good." "The other thing," he said, and then he paused in a way that she had never heard him pause before. Not the comfortable pause of a person gathering their thought, but a different kind. The pause of someone holding something back that they were not yet ready to release. "I am not ready to address that yet. I know that is not a satisfying answer." She looked at him. She thought about the feeling she had had in the bathroom, the presence of something she had not been told. She thought about whether she was willing to accept an answer that was not an answer. She was honest with herself, in that moment, about what she felt. She felt the pull of suspicion, the reasonable instinct to push further, to say, "But I have asked you a direct question, and I deserve a direct answer." She felt that, and she acknowledged it. And then she felt something else, which was the accumulated weight of the past weeks. Every conversation, every morning, every moment in which she had read a person and been right about what she read. She had been wrong about people before. She was not infallible. But she had also learned, over years, to trust the specific quality of evidence that accumulated over time and across contexts, because the only thing that could be consistently performed was the performance itself, and what she had seen from him was not a performance. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Again, that expression she could not quite name, the one that was quieter and more considered than a smile. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me," she said. "Tell me when you are ready." "I will," he said, and she believed him. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The wood pigeon started up again. The morning continued around them, unhurried and gray and ordinary, and the thing that had been said between them settled into the space it needed and became part of the pattern, rather than a disruption of it. But she walked back inside, carrying the question still. The way you carry something light enough not to require both hands, but present enough that you know it is there. The rumor, meanwhile, moved through the estate in the way of rumors, expanding slightly with each retelling, acquiring details that no one could trace to a source, taking on the solidity of things that have been repeated enough times that the repetition itself begins to feel like confirmation. By Wednesday it had acquired a specific shape, that Nadia had been cultivating a connection to an outside party through the groundskeeper, who was connected to people in high places. By Thursday it had been mentioned to Director Marsh, who had the sense and the fairness to file it under things people say when they are bored and underemployed, and take no action, though she did mention it to her assistant, and her assistant mentioned it to Oliver, and Oliver mentioned it to Nadia at the water cooler, with the expression of someone who thought he was delivering important news. "I know," Nadia said. "Thank you, Oliver." Oliver looked slightly deflated. He had been hoping for a more dramatic response. What Nadia actually did, in response to the rumor, was nothing visible. Internally, she did something she had learned to do in difficult situations. She identified the things she could control and the things she could not. She could not control what people said. She could not control what they assumed. She could not compel anyone to look at the actual evidence of her behavior and draw conclusions from it, rather than from a story they had invented. These were things she could not control, and expending energy on them would produce nothing useful. She could control her own behavior. She could be the same person on Thursday that she had been on Monday, the same at the water cooler as at the records room, the same in the corridor as at her desk, consistent in the way that was the only real answer to a reputation that someone else was trying to construct for her. She was herself, consistently, and she went about her work. Adrian Cleve had not spoken to her since the morning he came to her desk. She had seen him twice in the corridor, once at a distance, once near enough to make eye contact. He had given her a nod the second time, perfectly civil, the kind of nod that acknowledged her existence without conceding anything. She had returned it in kind. She had not reported the encounter with the document to anyone, for a reason that was not cowardice but calculation. She had no copy of the document, and no proof beyond her own recollection of its contents. An accusation without evidence would be heard, filed, and quietly returned to her as a mark against her. The person who had accused a senior manager of financial impropriety, with nothing to show for it. She knew the architecture of that outcome, and she had no interest in walking into it unprepared. What she was doing, without naming it as such, was waiting, watching, staying in her position and doing her job correctly, and maintaining her record, because a clean record was the only currency that was worth anything, if the situation eventually required a formal accounting. She told none of this to Kofi, not because she did not trust him, but because she had not yet sorted through it enough to say it clearly, and she did not like to say things she had not sorted through. Kofi, for his part, knew considerably more than she did. Leon had delivered his report in the promised 48 hours. The supply account discrepancies were real, systematic, and went back 14 months. The pattern was consistent with inflated purchase orders submitted to a supplier who was, it emerged, a company with a directorship connection to Adrian Cleve. The amounts were not enormous in isolation, but cumulatively they were significant, and the documentation trail was, for someone who knew where to look, quite clear. Kofi had read the report twice, and then filed it with the care it deserved. He had not yet decided what to do with it, but he had decided one thing. No adverse consequence was going to reach Nadia as a result of her refusal to sign that document. Whatever mechanism was required to ensure that, he would use it. He continued his days at the estate. He pruned and raked and edged and cleared, and spoke when spoken to, and said nothing that was not true. He watched the morning light change over the garden as December deepened. He kept track of the conversations around him, in the canteen, in the corridors, at the facilities shed, and he noted what the estate's social atmosphere was telling him about how it actually ran. And every morning, he went to the gate with his early start and his cup of whatever he had made in the rented room's small kitchen, and waited for the sound of her footsteps on the gravel path, and they stood in the cold and talked about things that were real, and the accumulation of those mornings had become something that he no longer needed to assess or examine, because it had simply become true. He admitted to himself on a Thursday evening in the quiet of his room, more certain than he had intended to become at this stage, more settled in a direction that was not about the estate's institutional character or the regional authorities' partnership decisions, but was about a person, specifically, whose name he said in his mind, with a quality of weight that he had not expected and could not reduce. He needed to tell her the truth. He knew this. He had known it was coming since the morning she had stood at the gate and said, "If there is something about your situation that I do not know, I would rather you told me than find out through someone else's version of it." He would tell her. He was going to tell her. But there was a sequence of things that needed to happen first. Things that had to do with the estate's situation and his authority to act on it. Things that had to do with his advisors and the delegation that was scheduled to arrive in the coming weeks. He needed those things in order before he placed himself in the position of having told her and watching what happened next. He was not ready. Not yet. But he was close. The word yet, the word he had used that morning at the gate, and that she had accepted with the particular grace of someone who had more patience than they were required to show. That word was doing a great deal of work. He held it carefully, aware of its weight, aware of what he owed her on the other side of it. He went to sleep that Thursday with the shape of a conversation in his mind that he had not yet spoken aloud to anyone. He rehearsed it, the way you rehearsed things that mattered, not to make them smooth, but to make them honest, to make sure the true version of it was the first one out. He owed her that. He owed her the first version being the true one. He slept. Outside, the garden was dark and cold, and frost was forming again on the grass, and in the morning, the birds would be back at the rose bed, and she would bring 2 cups of coffee, and he would have another day of being exactly who he was not, and of being, in the only way that ultimately counted, exactly who he was. The fire started in the storage wing at 20 minutes past 8 on a Wednesday evening. It was not a large fire, by the standards of such things. It began in a utility room, adjacent to the linen storage area, an electrical fault in an aging socket that had been reported twice in the preceding year and had not been repaired. The maintenance log showed both reports. It would later show that neither had been followed up. The socket overheated, the insulation gave way, and within 4 minutes, the dry materials stored in the utility room were producing enough smoke to trigger the building alarm. The alarm was loud and immediate, the kind that made thought difficult and movement instinctive. The estate had a fire protocol. It had been tested twice that year, in scheduled drills, and the majority of the staff knew what to do. The indoor staff moved toward the assembly points at the east and west ends of the main grounds. The operations team moved to isolate the affected wing. The catering staff, who were mid-service for a small evening event, suspended what they were doing and guided their guests out calmly and quickly. Nadia was in her office when the alarm sounded. She had stayed late to finish a briefing document that Director Marsh needed by the following morning, one of the late editions that had arrived at her desk at 5 when she was already planning to leave. She saved her work, collected her bag, and moved into the corridor with the controlled calm of someone who had drilled for exactly this. The corridor was already filling with people moving toward the west exit. She fell in with them, matching the pace, checking faces as she passed, a habit she had developed, and that was part of the same instinct that made her learn the names of people others overlooked. She counted as she moved. She knew the catering team was likely already out. She knew the records department staff had left at 5. She knew the evening maintenance rotation was 3 people, and that Gerald, who coordinated them, was a steady hand in a crisis. But as she moved through the main corridor toward the west exit, she registered something, a gap, a face she expected to see that she was not seeing. Mama Essie. Margaret Essie was 61 years old and had worked in the Grenville Estates kitchen for 17 years. She was a round, warm, unhurried woman who arrived earlier than anyone and often left later, who brought food from home to share on Fridays, who knew everyone's coffee preferences, and which of the administrative staff had a birthday coming up, and whose children had just started school. She was, in Nadia's estimation, one of the finest people in the building, and she was also, at the end of a long evening shift, sometimes still in the back kitchen well past the time the rest of the catering team had clocked off. Nadia stopped walking. The person behind her bumped lightly into her shoulder and said, "Keep moving, love," and she stepped to the side to let the flow of people pass, and then turned around. She went back. She went back down the main corridor and turned left through the double doors that separated the public part of the building from the service areas, and then left again toward the back kitchen, which was where Mama Essie would be if she was anywhere. The smoke was thicker here, not overwhelming, not yet, but present, with the particular quality of building smoke that was both acrid and strangely sweet. She pushed open the kitchen door. Mama Essie was at the far end of the kitchen, standing very still beside the industrial stove, not in the way of someone frozen by panic, but in the way of someone who had heard the alarm, and then, in the confusion of deciding what to take, had taken too long to start moving. She was holding her coat in one hand and her phone in the other, and she looked, when Nadia appeared in the doorway, profoundly relieved to see another human being. "Nadia," she said, the alarm. I was getting my things." "I know," Nadia said. "Come on. Now, leave the things." Mama Essie set the coat down on the counter and did not set the phone down, which Nadia did not argue with. She crossed the kitchen, moving faster than her usual pace. Nadia held the door. They moved back into the service corridor. The smoke was denser than it had been 30 seconds ago. Not dangerous yet, but faster moving than expected. Nadia put her hand on Mama Essie's arm and steered her toward the left, away from the direction of the storage wing and toward the rear service exit that she knew connected to the east grounds. They turned the corner. A figure was coming toward them. He moved through the smoke-hazed corridor with the direct, controlled pace of someone who had decided exactly where he was going and what the obstacles were, and had already calculated the way around them. He was not running, which was correct. Running in smoke and limited visibility in an enclosed space was how injuries happened. But he was moving fast enough, and when he reached them, he put one hand on Nadia's shoulder and one on Mama Essie's arm, and turned them both without hesitation toward the rear exit. "This way," Kofi said. "I know the way," Nadia started. "I know you do," he said. "Come on." They moved quickly. His hand stayed on Mama Essie's arm, guiding her pace without pulling, and he moved them both through the rear service corridor and out the emergency exit at the end of it, into the cold night air of the east grounds. The estate's grounds were lit by the lights from the main building and the faint amber of the external security lamps. Staff were assembled in clusters at the east assembly point. The operations team, the event guests wrapped in their coats, the remaining kitchen staff, Gerald with a clipboard, the fire service already arriving at the main gate with their lights and their controlled urgency. Nadia stopped on the grass and breathed. The cold air hit her lungs with an almost physical force of cleanness after the smoke, and she heard Mama Essie exhale beside her, a long, slow release of held breath. Mama Essie reached out and took Nadia's hand and held it for a moment. She said, in the particular way that she said things, with the full weight of what she meant and no decoration around it. "Thank you, my girl." Nadia squeezed her hand. "Nobody gets left behind," she said, "on my watch." She laughed when she said it, not because it was funny, but because laughter was what came out when the tension released, and she had learned not to fight whatever her body did in the moments immediately after fear. It was a real laugh, surprised out of her by her own relief, and Mama Essie laughed too, and the sound of it went up into the cold night air like something bright and unexpected. Kofi stood slightly apart from them. He was looking at Nadia. She turned, still laughing, and caught his eye. The laugh faded, not into discomfort but into something quieter. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before, one she could not immediately categorize, not the steady attentiveness of their usual conversations, but something more intense and less concealed, the kind of expression that happened when a person forgot for a moment to manage what they were showing. She met his eyes. He did not look away. He should have, perhaps, by the conventions of normal social interaction. He did not. "Thank you," she said. "I came in through the back," he said. "I knew you had stayed late." She blinked. "How did you know that?" A pause. A small one, but she caught it. "I saw your light on," he said. She accepted this. She would think about it later. Right now there was Mama Essie beside her and Gerald moving toward them with his clipboard, and the sound of the fire service working efficiently at the far end of the building, and the immediate reality of the evening had too many components to allow for the luxury of sustained analysis. Gerald confirmed their names on his list. He checked on Mama Essie with more genuine concern than Nadia had seen him display for anyone in the 3 years she had worked there, which told her something about what Mama Essie's presence in the building meant to the people who actually spent time with her. He guided them toward the warmth of the estate's event marquee, which had been opened for exactly this situation, and where someone had already set up the large tea urn. Nadia sat down on one of the long benches inside the marquee and held a cup of tea she did not particularly want, and thought about several things simultaneously. She thought about the smoke in the corridor, and about the moment of going back. She had not deliberated about it. She had stopped, she had noticed the gap, and she had turned around. The decision had not felt like a decision. It had felt like the only available thing. She was aware that this was not heroic. Heroism was when you overcame fear to do something. She had not overcome fear. She had simply moved before the fear had time to make its case. Whether that was bravery or a certain kind of temperamental obliviousness, she genuinely could not tell. She thought about Kofi, moving toward them in the smoke-hazed corridor, with the particular quality of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had not needed to calculate it. She thought about what he had said. "I knew you had stayed late." She thought about the expression on his face when she had turned and caught his eye. She replayed it, the unmanaged quality of it, the openness of it, the sense that she had seen, for a fraction of a second, the person behind the usual careful composure. She did not know what to make of that. She set it to one side. She thought about the rumor, the suggestion that he had connections, that he was not simply what he appeared to be. She thought about the corridor on his first day, and the ease with which he had moved through the east wing. She thought about the way he asked questions, not curious questions, but purposeful ones, the questions of someone who was gathering something. The feeling she had had in the bathroom, weeks ago, returned, the presence of something she had not been told. She sat with it. She did not force it into a shape. She held it the way you held something uncertain, with enough grip to know it was there, and enough openness to let it be what it actually was, rather than what you needed it to be. Kofi came into the marquee 20 minutes after everyone else. She watched him arrive. He spoke to Gerald first, briefly, confirming something on the clipboard. He spoke to one of the fire service coordinators who had come into the marquee to update the assembled staff. He moved through the space with the ease of someone comfortable in a room full of people who were looking to someone else for direction. He came to where she was sitting and sat down on the bench a few feet from her, not beside her but close enough to speak. "Everyone is out," he said. "The fire is contained to the utility room. The damage is limited." She nodded. "Good. You went back in," he said. It was not an accusation. It was not a compliment. It was simply an observation, stated in the tone of someone who had taken note of a fact. "I counted the faces and someone was missing," she said. He nodded once. He looked at the cup of tea in her hands. "You should drink that." "I know." She drank some of it. It was too sweet, but the warmth of it was useful. They sat for a moment in the noise and warmth of the marquee, among the voices of the assembled staff, and the distant sound of the fire service completing their work. The ash was faint on Nadia's coat. She noticed it when she looked down, a light gray dusting on the dark fabric. "Kofi," she said. He looked at her. "Whatever it is," she said, "that you have not told me yet." She paused. She chose her words with the care she always gave to things that mattered. "I hope it is not something I would not understand." He was quiet for a long moment. She watched his face, and it did the thing it had done on the grass outside. The brief unmanagement, the visible weight of something pressing against the composure. "It is not that," he said finally. "It is not something that would make you think less of the time we have had here." "Then I am not worried," she said. She meant it, or she intended to mean it, and the part of her that was being entirely honest with herself acknowledged that there was a small, specific anxiety in her chest that was not nothing, but she was choosing, consciously, not to let that anxiety govern her, because she had read this person over weeks of real, unguarded time, and what she had read was not something she doubted. She was not without questions. She was choosing to hold the questions alongside the trust, rather than letting the questions consume it. He looked at her for a moment longer than was entirely usual. Then he looked away, toward the large opening of the marquee and the cold night beyond it. "Soon," he said. The same word he had used at the gate, weeks ago, in a different context. "All right," she said. They sat. The tea cooled. Mama Essie was on the other side of the marquee, surrounded by kitchen colleagues who had come to sit with her, and every few minutes her laugh rose above the general noise, warm and round and entirely undiminished by the evening's disruption. Nadia listened to it, and felt something in her chest that was simply glad. She thought, this person beside me, with his borrowed jacket and his careful words, and his whatever it is that he has not told me. This person went into a building where the smoke was getting thicker, to come and find me. She thought, I do not know what that means, exactly. She thought, but I know what it feels like. She finished her tea. The evening continued. The fire service cleared the site. Director Marsh addressed the assembled staff with the stiff reassurance of someone more comfortable with paperwork than crisis, and the words were less important than the fact of them, and the staff began to filter back to their cars and their nights. Nadia walked to the car park and drove home, and went to sleep with the smell of smoke still faintly in her hair, and in the morning, she would bring 2 cups of coffee to the gate, and they would stand in the cold and talk, and all of it would be real, and she would carry the question, like she carried the coffee, carefully, with both hands, and without letting any of it spill. The delegation arrived on a Thursday, in 2 cars with dark windows, and a third vehicle that appeared to be some kind of logistical support. Nadia knew they were coming, in the same general way that all administrative staff knew when something important was incoming, through the accumulation of signals. The sudden intensification of Director Marsh's preparation schedule, the way the cleaning team had been asked to do an additional round of the formal reception rooms on Tuesday, the catering manager arriving early on Wednesday, with a face that suggested someone had sent a very specific brief about what the Thursday food would need to look like. The delegation was described, in the estate's internal communications, as a representative group from the regional authority. They were here, the brief stated, in connection with the ongoing partnership assessment, and Director Marsh would be hosting a formal meeting on Friday morning, at which the current year's operational review would be presented and discussed. This was a significant event, significant enough that several of the senior operations managers had been asked to prepare summaries, significant enough that Adrian Cleve had spent the past 2 days moving through the building with an air of elevated importance that Nadia had noticed without commenting on. Significant enough that Oliver had ironed his shirt on Thursday morning, for the first time since anyone could remember. Nadia's role in the event was supporting. She would handle documentation, minute-taking, and the coordination of any materials the director needed throughout the day. She had prepared carefully. The briefing folder was complete, the room was arranged correctly, the technology had been tested. She arrived at the estate on Thursday morning, without particular anxiety. She collected her coffee, she went to the garden gate. She stood in the cold morning air and waited. He was late, not significantly, 3 or 4 minutes, but he was usually there before her, and the absence of him in the usual spot created a small, specific absence in the morning that she noticed without wanting to notice it. He came through the garden gate from the direction of the south path, moving with a slightly different energy than usual. Not rushed exactly, but less settled, as though his morning had already involved something that required more of him than mornings usually did. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said. He accepted the cup. He did not immediately drink it. She looked at him. He was looking at the garden, or at the gate, or at some point in the middle distance that was more internal than external. He had a quality this morning that she had not seen before, not quite closed off, but more contained than usual, as though something were being held carefully and required concentration. "The delegation arrives today," she said, partly to say something, and partly because she was genuinely curious about his reaction. "I know," he said. She waited. He turned and looked at her. The quality of the look was different this morning. The same steady attention, but with something underneath it that she could not read, and that made her chest tighten slightly, in the way of someone standing at the edge of something, without yet knowing what it is. He opened his mouth. She saw him do it. She watched the intake of breath that preceded words. And then his jaw closed, and he looked back at the garden, and the breath was let out slowly, and he said, "I may not be at the gate tomorrow morning." She blinked. "Oh, I am sorry," he said, and it came out with a weight that was larger than the sentence required, which she noted. "It is all right," she said. "Is everything—" She stopped herself. She had asked that already. She did not repeat herself. "Yes," he said, "it is just, tomorrow will be different." She looked at him. He was still not meeting her eyes. "Different how?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you trust me for a little longer?" It was a strange thing to ask. It was strange because it assumed that she was already trusting him, which was true, and it was strange because it implied that the trust was about to be used for something that was not yet visible, which she did not like. But she had made her decision about this weeks ago, and she had not made it carelessly, and she was not going to unmake it, because of a sentence she did not fully understand. "Yes," she said, simple and direct, the way she said things she meant. He looked at her then, fully, directly, and what she saw in his expression made something in her go very quiet. Not alarmed, not confused, but quiet in the way of someone who has heard a sound they recognize but cannot yet name. "Thank you," he said. He drank his coffee. They stood in the cold. The morning did not offer the usual comfortable rhythm of conversation. Something had shifted in it, something that sat between them like a third presence. Not unwelcome, just different. Like the feeling before a change in weather, the air the same as it always was, but with something in it that made the air itself tell you something was coming. She went inside at the usual time. He stayed at the gate. She did not see him again that day. The delegation arrived at 11, as scheduled. Nadia was at her desk when she heard the vehicles on the gravel, and she glanced out her window long enough to see the cars arriving. The 2 dark-windowed vehicles and the support car. People stepping out in good coats, being greeted at the main entrance by Director Marsh and 2 of the senior operations managers. She went back to her work. Thursday passed in the particular way of days that are building toward something. Full, busy, slightly tilted toward the next morning. She had dinner at her flat, alone, and thought about the morning's conversation at the gate more than she had intended. Not with worry, or not only worry, with the peculiar alertness of someone who had been given a piece of a picture and could not yet see what the rest of it was. Friday morning. Nadia arrived at the estate at 7:20. She went to the garden gate. The gate was quiet. The birds were not on the rosebed this morning, or she could not see them. She stood there with both cups of coffee and felt, for the first time in weeks, the absence of the morning conversation, as an absence rather than simply a space. She gave it 5 minutes. Then she went inside. The formal meeting was scheduled for 9. Nadia spent the time before it preparing the materials, printing the final version of the operational review, double-checking the seating arrangement in the main conference room, confirming with catering that the refreshments were in place. She moved through these tasks efficiently and without feeling particularly settled. She was assigned to take the minutes of the meeting. She took a seat at the smaller table along the wall, with her laptop open and her notepad beside it, and she watched the room fill. Director Marsh arrived first, with her assistant. Then the 3 senior operations managers, including Adrian Cleve, who came in with the particular quality of someone who had spent the morning deciding how to position himself. Then the estate's executive chair, a tall man named Howard who she had met twice. The delegation entered last. There were 4 of them. 3 in the kind of professional dress that suggested they were advisors of some kind, with the contained, observant manner of people who attended a great many such meetings and knew how to be present in them without drawing attention. The 4th came through the door slightly behind them. Nadia looked up at the movement. It was a reflex. She logged arrivals. She matched faces to the list she had been given. She looked up, and her eyes tracked to the last figure, and she processed what she was seeing, and then she stopped processing and simply stared, which was something Nadia almost never did. He was in a dark, formal jacket that she had never seen before. His posture was the same as it always was, but the context of the room showed it differently, the way the same person looks different in different lighting, familiar and entirely new at once. The advisors around him had a specific quality of orientation, the way people orient around someone whose judgment they defer to, a degree of attention trained in one direction that you could see even when they were appearing not to show it. He walked to the head of the table. The head of the table. He walked to the head of the table and pulled out the chair and sat down, and the 3 advisors arranged themselves around him, and Director Marsh looked at him with an expression of respectful attention, and the estate's executive chair nodded with the gravity of someone acknowledging someone of significant standing. And his eyes found hers. Across the conference room, past the chairs and the table and the water glasses and the briefing folders, his eyes found hers with the directness of someone who knew exactly where to look. He held her gaze for 1 second, 2, 3. She felt the room around her as a physical thing, the weight of the chairs, the warmth of the lights, the texture of the laptop keys under her fingertips. She felt her own stillness, which was absolute and not chosen, which was the stillness of someone whose thinking has come to a complete temporary halt. He did not look away from her. She did not look away from him. Director Marsh said, "Welcome, and thank you for joining us. We are pleased to receive the regional authority delegation, and especially honored by the presence of," and she said the name. It was his full name, both parts of it, the title before the name. Nadia heard it. She heard every syllable of it, and she recognized each one, individually, and then she put them together in order, and she understood what they made. She set her pen down on the notepad with a steadiness that was entirely separate from what was happening inside her. She placed both hands flat on the table, not visibly, under the edge of the laptop. She breathed once, slowly. He was still looking at her. His face was very still, composed, professionally composed, the composure of someone who had been in many rooms, in many formal capacities, and knew how to hold themselves in those rooms. But his eyes were different. His eyes were doing something more complicated. Director Marsh was still speaking. Around her, people were shifting papers and opening folders and behaving in the normal way of people at the beginning of a formal meeting. She needed to be typing. She needed to have her fingers on the keys and her attention on the words being spoken so that she could produce the minutes that she had been assigned to produce. She lifted her hands. She placed them on the keyboard. She did not type anything for almost 20 seconds, which was very unlike her. Then she took another breath, and she began to type, and the meeting continued around her, and she did her job, and she did it correctly, because she was Nadia, and she did not stop doing her job correctly, simply because the world had just tilted by an angle that she had not been given any notice of. But she sat with the weight of it through every moment of that meeting, and he sat at the head of the table and conducted himself with the focused professionalism of the person he actually was, and every few minutes his eyes moved to her, briefly, with the weight of everything that had not yet been said. She thought, I am going to have questions for you. She thought, and I am going to ask them. She kept typing, and the meeting went on, and the morning moved toward noon with the unhurried indifference of time, and neither of them left the room. The meeting ended at 12:30. The director thanked the delegation for their time. The senior operations managers gathered their folders. People moved toward the door in the usual way of people at the end of a formal session, relieved to be moving, already thinking about the next thing. Nadia saved her document for the final time. She closed her laptop. She stood up from the small table along the wall, and she gathered her things, and she moved to the door, and the movement felt entirely ordinary from the outside, and was not ordinary at all from the inside. She had typed 7,341 words in that meeting. She knew, because the count was at the bottom of her document, and she had looked at it when the meeting ended, not out of pride, but out of the need for something concrete to look at. Numbers were concrete. Numbers were reliable. The number 7,341 was a fact that did not change when you looked at it. What she did not have a number for was the weight of what had happened in that room, which was not 7,000 words long and could not be typed. She went to her desk after the meeting. She had work to do. The minutes needed to be edited and formatted and sent to Director Marsh by end of day, and there were 2 other tasks she had committed to completing before 5. She did these things in order, with the same methodology she brought to everything, and she did them correctly, and when they were done she shut down her computer and collected her coat and went home. On the other side of the building, in the small room that the estate had assigned to the visiting delegation, Kofi sat at a table with Leon and the other 2 advisors and reviewed the morning. The meeting had been productive. The estate's operational review had been thorough. The systems and processes were stronger than he had initially expected, in part due to changes already underway. The partnership agreement, in his assessment, was ready to proceed. He said all of this in the appropriate order, and Leon noted it, and they discussed the fine points of the formal agreement that would be drafted in the following week. He was present for this conversation. He engaged with it carefully and made the decisions it required. And when it was over, and the advisors had gone to their own rooms, he sat at the table alone for a while and thought about a woman walking away from a gate in the early morning, without looking back. He had been in many rooms today. He would be in many more before the weekend was done. He was accustomed to rooms. He was accustomed to the formality of them, and the performance they required, and the management of his own expression and posture and presence in them. He had learned this over 6 years, and he did it well. And today he had done it well in a room where the most difficult thing he had faced was not the operational review or the questions about the partnership structure, but the presence, in a chair along the wall, of someone who did not yet know what he needed to say to her, and who deserved to hear it from him directly, rather than through a door she had not been given a key to. Tomorrow she would have to decide. He was aware of what he was asking her to decide, and he was aware of the weight of it. He had not engineered the situation. He had not begun those conversations with this ending in mind. But here they were, and the ending, or the beginning, which is what he hoped it was something she had to choose, and he could not choose it for her, and he would not try. He thought about the expression on her face when he had walked to the head of the table. He had watched for it, deliberately, because he had owed her the honesty of watching, not looking away, not making it easier on himself by pretending this moment was not what it was. He had seen it arrive and shift and settle, and he had seen her set her pen down with the steady hands of someone who was holding herself together through sheer will, and then he had seen her pick the pen back up and begin her work again. That was who she was. That was exactly who she was. He had come to the estate looking for something real. Tomorrow, if she was willing, he would find out if what was real could also be the beginning of something good. The meeting broke for refreshments at 11, and when it broke, she left. She did not make an announcement. She did not look at anyone. She saved her document. She collected her notepad. She stood up from the small table along the wall and walked to the door and through it, and the door closed behind her with the soft, certain sound of a thing that had been decided. The corridor was cool and quiet after the warmth of the conference room. She walked its length without a specific destination, though her feet took her toward the rear of the building, toward the service areas and the back corridor, and the exit that connected to the east grounds, the same route she had taken on the night of the fire, the same exit Kofi had moved them toward in the smoke. She was not going to the grounds. She just needed to be moving, because she could not stay still with what was inside her right now, and the closest available thing to stillness was walking without stopping. She pushed through the double doors at the end of the corridor and let them swing shut behind her. She stood in the back corridor. The floor polish smell was there, as always. The narrow high windows let in strips of cold winter light. She breathed in slowly, and breathed out slowly, and did it again, and she stood very still and let the corridor be quiet around her, while she did the thing she always did. When something unexpected arrived, she took stock. She went through the facts, not what she felt about them. The feelings could come later. The facts first. The man she had been talking to every morning for 6 weeks had a full name that included a title. The title meant he was the regional authority's senior governing figure for 4 mountain districts. He had been at the estate under a false description for the entire time she had known him. He had watched her. He had asked her questions. He had seen things she did not know she was being observed doing. She had found his envelope. She had gone back into the building for Mama Essie. She had refused to sign Adrian Cleave's document. She had confronted the rumor about herself directly and without deflection. She had been honest in every conversation at that gate, without strategy, without calculation, without any thought that any of it meant anything beyond the immediate and ordinary value of 2 people talking honestly in the cold. She held all of that in her mind at once. She let it sit there. She heard the doors open behind her. She did not turn around. She waited. His footsteps crossed the space between the doors and where she stood. They stopped when she was within reach, not touching distance, a few feet, the respectful distance of someone who understood that the space was hers to manage, that the next move was not his to make. She turned around. He was there. The formal jacket was the same. His face was the same face it had always been, the same bones, the same eyes, the same quality of attention that she had come to know across 6 weeks of mornings. Nothing about his actual face had changed. Everything about the context of it had changed completely. How long? She said. It was the first question, and it was the right first question, and she asked it without anger in her voice, because anger was not the first thing she felt. The first thing she felt was a very deep, very specific need to know the exact shape of what she had not been told. He did not pretend not to understand. From the beginning, he said, I came to the estate to conduct an assessment. I came as a worker, because I needed to see what the place was actually like, when it thought no one of importance was watching. She looked at him. She kept her voice level. And the conversations, she said. The mornings. The coffee. Was that part of the assessment? No, he said. The assessment was the estate. The mornings were. He paused. He appeared, for the first time, to be choosing words with difficulty, which she had never seen from him before. Every other time he had chosen words carefully, but not with difficulty. The difficulty was new. The mornings were not part of any plan, he said. They were what happened when the plan encountered a person it had not accounted for. She was quiet for a moment. The corridor was very quiet around them both. You let me believe you were someone you were not, she said. Yes, he said. He did not qualify it. He did not soften it. He did not say, but consider my reasons, or there is context you are missing. He gave her the direct admission of it, cleanly, without padding, which she noted, and which mattered to her, and which was exactly the thing she needed him to do at this moment, even though it also hurt. Every day, she said, for weeks. Yes. She looked at him. She thought about the mornings. She thought about the sparrows on the branch, and the coffee going cold, and the conversation about her mother, and standing on the grass after the fire, with ash on her coat. She thought about the question she had asked him directly at the gate. If there is something you have not told me, I would rather hear it from you than through someone else's version. And she thought about his answer, which had been not yet, not no, not there is nothing to tell, not yet. She had accepted that. She had held the uncertainty, and she had continued to show up at the gate in the mornings, and she had been present and honest and herself in every one of those conversations, and she had done all of that without knowing what she was doing it in the context of. Why, she said. She meant, why come in disguise at all? And she meant, why the conversations? And she meant, why look at her across that conference room, with that expression she had never been able to name, and why go into the building on the night of the fire, and why not yet rather than no? He seemed to understand that the question was all of those questions at once, compressed into a single word. He answered it in the same spirit, not one part of it, but the whole. I have spent 6 years in a position where most people show me the version of themselves they think I want to see, he said. His voice was even, but she could hear the weight of what was underneath it. Not performance, not management. The actual thing. I needed to see what was real. I needed to see how the estate actually ran, and how the people in it actually behaved when they did not know they were being observed. That was the institutional reason for being here. He paused. And I found something I was not looking for, in those weeks, and I was not willing to cut it short before I understood it properly. She held his gaze. Something, she said. One word, flat, not inviting him toward the comfortable version. He met it without looking away. You, he said. Simply, without embellishment, without any construction around it to make it sound more considered than it was. Just the one word, and the weight of all the weeks behind it, stated plainly in a back corridor, where they were alone, and the only thing left to do was be honest. She was very still. She thought, I knew there was something I had not been told. She thought, I stayed anyway. I stayed because of what I had read in him, and I was not wrong about what I read, but I was also not told the whole of what I was reading, and those two facts are both true, and I am not yet sure how to hold them together. She thought, he is telling me the truth right now, not the rehearsed version. Not the managed version. The thing itself, unadorned, offered in a corridor without ceremony. She could hear it. She had always been able to hear the difference between the version of a thing and the thing. She thought, that does not resolve everything. I am not a person who can be chosen without knowing the choosing is happening, she said carefully. I need you to understand that. I know, he said. I need to decide things for myself, she said. I am not someone who is decided about and then presented with the decision. I know that too, he said, which is why I am standing in this corridor, telling you everything, rather than presenting you with a finished conclusion, and waiting for you to accept it. She looked at him for a long moment. From somewhere far down the building, she could hear the low murmur of the meeting reconvening. Voices, a chair being pushed back, the distant sound of the estate proceeding with its ordinary business, without either of them in it. She had a great many things to say. She had feelings that she had not yet categorized, which was an uncomfortable state for her, because she was someone who categorized things. She had questions about what this meant practically, about what it would mean for her role at the estate, about what he expected from this conversation, and from whatever came after it. She had all of it, and it was all legitimate, and she was not going to compress it into an answer right now simply because he was waiting. She was not going to be rushed. She had never been rushed in her life, and she was not going to begin now. I need to think, she said. Of course, he said. He did not push, he did not shift his weight toward her, or make any move that could be read as pressure. He simply accepted it, in the way of someone who had expected exactly this response, and who was genuinely all right with it. How much time do you have? She asked. I am here through the weekend, he said. The formal part of the visit ends tomorrow afternoon. She did the mathematics of that in her head. 1 day, less than 1 day, if the visit ended in the afternoon. She would need to find him before that, or the moment would close, and there would be a different kind of conversation required, a longer distance one, which would be harder, and would change the shape of it. I will find you, she said, before you leave. He looked at her for a moment, and she saw it again, the expression she had never been able to name, the one from the conference room, from the grass after the fire, from the gate on difficult mornings, when he had watched her, and said nothing, and she had felt the weight of the nothing. She was closer to naming it now. She was not quite there yet. All right, he said. She turned, and went back through the double doors, and down the corridor, and back to the conference room, where the meeting had reconvened, and the empty chair at the minute-taker's table was the most visible thing in the room. She slid into it and opened her laptop and caught up with the last 2 minutes of notes and continued doing her job, and she did it correctly, because she was Nadia, and she did not stop doing her job correctly simply because the world had just reorganized itself around her. He came back into the room 4 minutes after she did. He returned to his seat at the head of the table. He did not look at her. He gave his full attention to the meeting. He asked precise, well-informed questions that demonstrated a familiarity with the estate's operations, that went considerably beyond what a visiting delegate would normally bring to a first formal meeting. She listened to him ask those questions, and she understood, in a new layer, what he had been doing in those weeks of being Kofi the groundskeeper. He had been gathering genuine knowledge of how the place ran, absorbing the rhythms of it, learning its actual character rather than its presented character, so that when he sat at this table in this jacket, he could engage with it at the level it deserved. He was not performing competence. He actually had it. The weeks of watching had given him something real. She understood that. She turned it over in her mind, and she let the understanding be complicated, which it was, because she was also the person who had talked to him every morning without knowing who she was talking to, and that had its own specific weight that she was not going to pretend was simple, and she was going to carry both things at once, because that was what honesty required. She kept typing, and the meeting went on, and he was across the room from her, and the distance was the same distance as any large conference room, and it was also something else entirely, and she held both of those things at once, because she had always been good at holding things. That evening Nadia sat at the table in her flat for a long time, without doing anything in particular. She had eaten something, she was not sure what, exactly, something quick and warm from the pan, the kind of meal that performs the function of sustenance without demanding attention. She had changed out of her work clothes. She had turned the lamp on by the window, the low warm one that she used in the evenings when she was thinking, rather than the overhead light that she used when she was working. She had made tea and let it cool without drinking it. She had picked up her book twice and put it down both times within a minute. She was thinking. The first thing she thought about was the anger, because she believed in naming things before she processed them. She identified it carefully, the way you handle something delicate, making sure of the shape and weight of it before deciding what to do with it. The anger was real. It was specific. It was directed at a situation more than at a person, which she noted, because the distinction mattered to her. What she was angry about was this. The conversations at the gate had been, on her side, entirely open. She had told him about her mother. She had told him about the times she had nearly left the estate. She had told him about her reasons for staying, about the way the work reached people, about the thing that kept her going. She had said those things freely and honestly and without calculation, because that was how she talked when she was talking to someone she trusted. And she had trusted him. She had extended that trust genuinely, based on what she read in him, and what she had read had not been false. That was the complicating fact. He had not performed kindness. He had been kind. He had not performed attention. He had paid it. He had not said false things to her. He had withheld a true one, which was a different kind of dishonesty, and she was clear-eyed about the difference, but she also understood that different was not the same as absent. The trust had been real on her side. The friendship had been real. The conversations had been real. His presence in them had been real. The only thing that had not been what she believed it was, had been the circumstance around all of it, and circumstance was not nothing. She held the anger and examined it, and found that it was not the largest thing in her. It was real, and it was there, and it deserved its space, but it was not the largest thing. She thought about the quality of his attention in those conversations. 6 weeks of mornings. She had been observed in that time. She understood that now. But the observation had not been cold or calculating, and she had read him well enough, across enough different contexts, to know the difference between someone who was watching in order to use what they saw, and someone who was watching because they could not help it, because what they were seeing had caught and held something in them. She thought about the night of the fire, and the corridor, and the directness with which he had moved toward them through the smoke. She thought about the morning at the gate, when he had said not yet, which was not a lie, which was the precise, careful truth of a person who was not ready, who could not say yes, but would not say no, who was choosing the honest, narrow path between complete disclosure and complete concealment. Not yet. She had accepted that. She had chosen to accept it, and she had not chosen it out of naivety, or out of a wish to believe the best, when the evidence did not support it. She had chosen it, because the evidence did support it. Weeks of mornings, small acts, the way he handled difficulty, the way he said things he meant. She thought about the corridor this afternoon, and the way he had said, the mornings were not part of any plan. She thought about the way he had said not presenting you with a finished conclusion. She thought about him standing in that corridor, with the composure of someone who had decided to give her the complete truth without decoration, without preparation, without making it easier on himself or harder on her. She believed him. Not because she wanted to, because he was the kind of person who could be believed, and she had spent 6 weeks establishing that, and she was not going to abandon 6 weeks of genuine evidence because the moment of revelation had been difficult. She turned the situation over until she had a shape for it, and the shape was not comfortable, and was not simple, but it was honest, and honest was what she worked with. Then she turned to the second question, which was the practical one, and the practical question was considerably larger. He was the alpha of a regional authority. He was a figure of significant governance and public responsibility. The meetings he attended in formal jackets with dark-windowed cars were presumably a regular feature of his life, not an occasional one. The world he moved in was not the world she moved in. She had a flat 2 miles from the estate. She had a junior administrator's salary, and cactus on the windowsill that she had managed to keep alive for 3 years, which she privately considered an achievement. She had a work friend named Diane, and a colleague named Colin, who made her laugh at lunch, and a life that was small and real, and hers. She was not going to pretend that the distance between those two circumstances was not significant. It was significant. It had implications that she could not fully see from where she was standing, and she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that she was standing in the middle of a very large unknown. But she also had something that was concrete and knowable, which was the person himself. Not the title, not the authority, not the formal jacket or the dark-windowed cars. The person who had stood at the garden gate in worn boots and accepted a cup of coffee with both hands and listened to her talk about her mother with the full weight of his attention. She had that. She had 6 weeks of it. And that was more than most people had of each other before they began anything at all. She thought about what he had said, whether you would be willing to start again from here. Not from the weeks of it, not from the context of what he had known and she had not. From here, today, with both of them knowing everything. That was a careful thing to ask, a respectful thing. It was asking her to be a full participant in whatever came next, not someone who was being led into it. It was acknowledging that the asymmetry of the past weeks was a problem to be addressed, not minimized or talked around. She thought, that matters to me. The shape of the asking matters. I have known from the first morning that this person does not do things carelessly, and the asking is not careless, and I should weigh it as carefully as it was offered. She thought until she was done thinking, and then she went to bed. She lay in the dark for a while, and did not sleep immediately. She thought about one more thing, which was this. She had spent her entire adult life being the person who did things correctly, who showed up, who stayed, who held the line, who went back into buildings for people who had been left behind, who refused to sign documents she knew were false, who said what she meant and did not dress it up. She had done all of this because it was who she was, not because she expected to be rewarded for it. And she had never, at any point, thought of it as the kind of thing that could lead somewhere. She had been wrong about that. In the morning, she made herself breakfast and drank coffee at her own kitchen table, and looked at the cactus on the windowsill, and thought about what her mother would have said. Her mother would not have been sentimental about it. Her mother had been a practical woman. She would have said, the facts are the facts, decide what you are going to do with them, and do it. She drove to the estate. She parked. She did not go in through the main entrance. She walked around to the garden gate, because that was where this had started, and it seemed right that it should continue there. He was there. Not in the formal jacket, in plain clothes, dark trousers, a simple dark shirt, the same kind of clothes she had seen him in any other morning. He was standing at the gate with his hands in his pockets, and he looked, without the formal context around him, exactly like himself. The person she had been talking to every morning for 6 weeks. Not a different person, the same person, with a different truth attached to him, and a much larger life, and a story she had only partly known. She walked up to him. She stopped. I did not bring coffee, she said. I did not think that far ahead this morning. Something in his expression moved. It is all right, he said. She looked at him steadily. I have some things to say, and I want you to hear all of them before you say anything. Yes, he said, and he gave her the same quality of attention he had always given her at this gate, which was the kind that did not interrupt, and did not preempt, and did not move past you to the conclusion before you had reached it yourself. What you did, coming here the way you did, the weeks of it, I understand why you did it, she said. I understand the logic of it. A place that knows it is being watched, shows you what it looks like when it is trying to impress you. A place that does not know it is being watched shows you who it actually is. I understand that reasoning, and I think it is sound. She paused, not for effect, but because she was choosing her words the way she always chose them, carefully, with care for the difference between what she meant and what she did not mean. And I also want you to know that I did not appreciate being the person who was honest in those conversations, without knowing that the honesty was not being met with the same thing. That mattered to me. It still matters to me. I want to be clear about that. He met her eyes. He did not look away. He did not attempt to diminish what she had said, or redirect it, or make it smaller than it was. I know, he said. You are right about that. I am not a prize, she said. I am not a thing that exists at the end of a test and is awarded when the test is passed. No, he agreed. You are not. And I am not going to be swept into anything, she said. And she said it with the quietness of someone who had spent a long time knowing this about themselves and did not need to raise her voice to make it plain. Not by circumstance, not by the impressiveness of a title, not by anything that is not a genuine and mutual choice, made between two people who know what they are choosing and are choosing it freely. I understand that, he said. I am not asking you to be swept. She looked at him. She took a breath. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. Not the evasive quiet of someone buying time to construct the convenient version. The genuine quiet of someone who wants to say the true thing and is making sure they have found it before they open their mouth. I am asking, he said, whether you would be willing to start from here. Not from the weeks of it, not from the imbalance of what I knew and what you did not. From here, today, with both of us, knowing everything, and both of us choosing freely. He looked at her with the same directness she had come to know from him across weeks of mornings. I am not asking you to accept what has already happened as the foundation. I am asking whether you would like to begin, now, on level ground. She thought about that. She turned it over in her mind, with the same deliberate care she gave to everything that mattered. That is a different question from the one I expected, she said. I know, he said. I think it is the honest one. She looked at the garden. It was a clear morning, cold and very bright. The sky the deep winter blue that appeared only on days without clouds, when the cold pressed everything to its essential character, and the light had no softness in it, only precision and clarity, and the sharp outline of things that were simply what they were. She could see her breath. The rose bed was bare of birds this morning, but the morning itself was exactly the kind her mother had described. Cold, honest, no room for pretending. She was not pretending. She had not pretended anything in the 6 weeks they had been talking at this gate, and she was not going to start now. She looked at him steadily, and did not rush what she had to say, because she had decided in the night that she was not going to rush any part of this. What you did, coming here the way you did, the weeks of it, I understand why you did it, she said. I understand the logic of it. A place that knows it is being watched shows you what it looks like when it is trying to impress you. A place that does not know it is being watched shows you who it actually is. I understand that reasoning, and I think it is sound. She paused, not for effect but because she was choosing her words as she had always chosen them, specifically, with care for the difference between what she meant and what she did not mean. And I also want you to know that I did not appreciate being the person who was honest in those conversations, without knowing that the honesty was not being met with the same thing from the other side. That mattered to me. It still matters to me. I want to be clear about that. He met her eyes. He did not look away. He did not attempt to diminish what she had said, or redirect it, or make it smaller than it was. I know, he said. You are right about that. I am not a prize, she said. I am not a thing that exists at the end of a test, and is awarded when the test is passed. No, he agreed. You are not. And I am not going to be swept into anything, she said. And she said it with the quietness of someone who had spent a long time knowing this about herself, and did not need to raise her voice to make it plain. Not by circumstance, not by the impressiveness of a title, not by anything that is not a genuine and mutual choice, made between two people who know what they are choosing, and are choosing it freely. I understand that, he said. I am not asking you to be swept. She looked at him. She took a breath. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. Not the evasive quiet of someone buying time to construct the convenient version, the genuine quiet of someone who wants to say the true thing and is making sure they have found it before they open their mouth. I am asking, he said, whether you would be willing to start from here. Not from the weeks of it, not from the imbalance of what I knew and what you did not. From here, today, with both of us knowing everything and both of us choosing freely. He looked at her with the same directness she had come to know from him across weeks of mornings. I am not asking you to accept what has already happened as the foundation. I am asking whether you would like to begin, now, on level ground. She thought about that. She turned it over in her mind with the same deliberate care she gave to everything that mattered. That is a different question from the one I expected, she said. I know, he said. I think it is the honest one. She looked at the garden. It was a clear morning, cold and very bright. The sky the deep winter blue that appeared only on days without clouds, when the cold pressed everything to its essential character, and the light had no softness in it, only precision and clarity, and the sharp outline of things that were simply what they were. She could see her breath. The rose bed was bare of birds this morning, but the morning itself was exactly the kind her mother had described. Cold, honest, no room for pretending. She was not pretending. She had not pretended anything in the 6 weeks they had been talking at this gate, and she was not going to start now. She thought about what he had said. Whether you would be willing to start from here. She thought about the word willing. It was the right word. It acknowledged that there was something to be willing for. That beginning this was not a passive thing, not a thing that happened to you, not a consequence you submitted to. It was an active thing, a choice, her choice. She thought about her mother, who had made hard choices for decades, and had never made any of them out of convenience. She thought about what her mother would have said to her this morning, if she were here, standing in the cold garden, with her breath making clouds in the air. She would not have been sentimental about it. She would have said, you know what you know about this person. What you know is real. The question is, what you are going to do with it. She turned back to him. She extended her hand. Not as a grand gesture, not with ceremony or performance. Simply her hand, open, between them, in the ordinary way of someone who has made a decision, and is offering the physical fact of it. Two people. Common ground. Begin. He looked at her hand for a moment. She watched him look at it, and she watched the shift in his expression that was larger than what the moment required on the surface, and was therefore real. He took her hand. His hand was warm, despite the cold, which she noticed. His grip was neither too firm nor too tentative, the grip of someone who had decided and was not going back from the decision. She held on for a moment. He held on in return. Around them the garden was still and cold and honest, and somewhere in the yew hedge there was the faint sound of birds going about their morning. Then she looked at the garden, because she had been looking at him long enough, and she needed a moment to let things settle, without the full weight of being seen back. You have done good work out here, she said. He looked at the garden too. It is better than it was, he said. She thought about what he had told her on that very first morning at this gate, that what satisfied him about this kind of work was being able to point to something and say, that is better than it was. She thought about how she had heard that and taken it in, standing with a cup of coffee she had not planned to share, before she knew what any of this was going to become. She thought, the garden is better than it was. The rose bed is tended. The paths are even. The things that had been let go are being attended to, and none of that is an accident. It is the result of weeks of someone showing up and doing the work correctly, without requiring anyone to notice. She thought, I know what that is. I have been doing it my whole life. She released his hand, because the garden gate of the Grenville estate on a Friday morning was not the place to stand holding hands indefinitely, and both of them were the kind of people for whom there were always things to do, and who did not avoid doing them. I will see you later, she said. He nodded. Yes, he said. And the way he said it was the way she had come to know from him, without performance, without the filling of space that words did not need to fill. Simply yes, and the weight of everything the yes contained. She walked back through the gate and across the gravel path and into the building. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. She began her day. In the weeks that followed, the formal assessment was completed, and the partnership agreement between the regional authority and the Grenville estate was signed and came into effect. The supply account discrepancy was properly investigated, which led to a formal review process that involved several people, including Adrian Cleve, who left the estate's employ before the review concluded. The original delivery receipts, properly logged and preserved by Pat in the records room, were an important part of the documentary evidence. The report noted, without elaboration, that an authorized administrator had declined to sign a document that would have obscured the discrepancy, and that this refusal had been the point at which the investigation could begin. Nobody made a great fuss about Nadia's role in this. The report noted it and moved on. She did not make a fuss about it either. She had done what she had done because it was right, and it being noted in a formal report was not the reason she had done it, and she did not need it to be anything more than what it was. Several things at the estate changed over the following months. The people whose names had not been known began to be known. The maintenance log was reviewed, and several long outstanding repairs were completed, including the faulty socket in the utility room that had caused the fire. Communication between the indoor and outdoor staff improved in the way that things improve when someone at a level of influence makes it their business to notice the gap and close it. Mama Essie's kitchen received new equipment that had been on a request list for 4 years. Pete's mailroom received a proper labeling system so that important envelopes would not end up in the holding tray again. These were not dramatic changes. They were the kind of changes that came from someone looking at a place honestly and deciding that what was let go should be properly tended. They accumulated slowly, the way improvements accumulate when someone is paying real attention, and after some months, the estate was recognizably the same place but better in the ways that mattered, the ways you could point to and name. The story began to travel, as true stories do. Not through any official announcement, not through any ceremony, but through the accumulation of accounts from people who had been there, who had seen the woman stop at the gate to help a stranger on his first morning, who had seen her come back into the building for Mama Essie, who had seen her refuse to sign the document and face the consequences without flinching, who had seen her stand at the garden gate every Wednesday morning with 2 cups of coffee, talking to a man in worn boots as though the conversation was important. It was important. It had always been important. The importance of it was exactly what had not been visible to anyone who was only watching the surface. The story was told as the story of a woman who asked the servant for help, not knowing who he was. But the people who had actually been there, the ones who had watched the morning light shift from gold to white over the rose bed, who had heard the quiet exchange of 2 cups placed on stone, who had seen 2 people stand in the cold and talk as though nothing was more worth doing, those people told it differently. They told it as the story of 2 people who had seen each other in the kind of light that does not flatter and does not conceal, and had found each other worth the seeing. And at a garden gate, on a clear, cold morning, a woman had extended her hand, and a man had taken it, and something had begun that was not easy, and was not simple, and was, in every way that mattered, entirely real. Which was, in the end, the only version of the story that was entirely true.